Is this what you got me? Yeah, keep talking until you got me. That's great. Well, hey, it's fun to be here. So already, I mean, I know Shannon, but I talked to some people who were like 20 years ago. Heather was like, so when I was a college student, 20 years ago, I was in your wife's Bible study. And I was like, oh my goodness. Am I really that old? Yep, it happens to all of us. So it's great to be here. My wife actually got to benefit from MOPS when our kids were preschoolers, which is really fun. So, but now she's a MOT, teenagers, so that's our reality. I remember when our kids were preschoolers, people would be like, oh, just wait till they're teenagers, it's so much harder, you have to like drive them everywhere, they're so angsty. And I was like, whatever, we can't even go to the bathroom alone, you know? And we were right? Like your preschool years, they're just way more intense, you know, like it's a different kind of intensity as teenagers, but you guys are in it, right? It is like beautiful and fun, but it is so full these years. So like, don't let anybody tell you that teenage years are harder. They're a different kind of hard, but like, I have to drive my kids around and wait for them after soccer practice. But I play video games on the phone. And my wife watches like her favorite shows and catches up on podcasts. You don't get to do any of those things, right? So, and we sleep. So like, you're in it. So, but you'll get through it, and then you'll really miss it. And I know you're like, I don't believe you, but you will. It's true. So so this is my family. Will, he is an 8th grader now. He's full-blown middle school. He's like hit puberty. He's hardly here. He's all like, Dad, can you believe God lets me drive this body? Like he's touching things. He doesn't say that, but it is sort of like he's gotten a car. He's like, I can't believe I could do and touch things I couldn't touch. You know, he's like all over the place. Charlie is in the 6th grade middle school and in love with life. And Marguerite, she's a freshman at Memorial, and she's really actually loving high school too. So, and that is my awesome wife. They are heading out today to go on spring break because of my wife's family, but it's the week before Easter, and in church world, Dad has to stay home for Easter stuff. So that's them. This is us last year in Madison. So we're talking. You guys are talking about exploring God's world with your kids. I love getting to have adventures with my kids. That's sort of been one of my favorite things. My wife and I are both kind of adventurous. I think there is always a risk as a parent that you will avoid risk at all costs. You're going to want to keep them safe. And you want to think of yourself as like a tour guide through life, you know? And you're going to show them things in the safe environment of a museum, you know? But really, more than that, you are like the expedition leader in life, because you really can't keep them safe. Your goal is more to be an expedition leader, and to sort of like with increasing amounts of risk, lead the way through like increasing amounts of appropriate risk in life, and to be willing to do that with them, because really you can't keep them safe, right? And so and you just have to help them learn to navigate the different kinds of risks in life, and help them be able to sort of process the things that they will see and experience in a way that will help them be able to process out those things in a healthy way. Because without sort of like going on those fun, risky adventures, if they sort of stay in the museum with their tour guide, then when they finally are set free, they're going to be like, what is happening? You know, they won't be prepared for the actual risks that happen. So it's actually more risky to not help them, to not go on the adventures with them, and to help them experience the different kinds of risks that they experience in life. So some of that for us parents, we have to sort of embrace that role as being sort of expedition leaders rather than tour guides, you know, through life. So one of the crazy things that we did back in 2015 that felt scary for us was we were actually part of the little group of people who were part of the launch for this little church when we met back in the school. And our kids were preschool age. but we sold our house in Fitchburg and our minivan and got rid of our backyard and 3/4 of everything we owned, and we moved to New York City. And we traded in our minivan for a very small stroller and the public transit system and a very small apartment building. And we moved right to the middle of Manhattan in a neighborhood called Hell's Kitchen. Hell was a bad word in our neighborhood until we lived there. And this was a year or two into us living here. This was our family picture. This was not a vacation. This was our walk to church on a Sunday morning. Yeah, my sister's a photographer. My wife's sister is a photographer, and she was walking with us to church. She was visiting us that weekend. And the lights turned, and she was on the other side of the street, walking across the street. We just stopped real quick, and she took the picture, and we just kept walking on our way to church. So we just lived in the middle of it. And so our life changed pretty drastically, especially for our little ones. You know, the world that they grew up in Madison, and then the world they inherited when we moved to New York City was vastly different. And so there was a lot of sort of exploring, a lot of new risks that we didn't even know we were going to face, and things that they were going to experience every day. And it was really different. You know, so Will and Charlie were both sort of preschool age. Will went to kindergarten for the first time when we were in New York City. Marguerite started in first grade in New York. And we loved the city. It was kind of a wild ride. This is a picture of my wife. This is, we went out to New York. This is our neighborhood. This is right outside our building. Very interesting things. I wasn't planning on sharing. So my parents drove our kids out. So we moved into our little apartment, and we sort of tried to set it up to look as much like home as we could, so our kids wouldn't be totally shocked by their new life. Like, they had a backyard and all sorts of things. And then we built triple-decker bunk beds so they could fit into a tiny apartment, you know? They had a backyard and grass, and then they didn't have a yard. You know, their next door neighbors on the corner were like this sweet old couple that they loved, and now on the corner was a gas station, and there was a prostitution ring that was run out of the gas station. You know, it was like, okay, this is new, you know? And this was the first morning that they woke up in their new neighborhood, and we were gonna show them around their neighborhood. And this is my wife. I took this picture, and I love it. And she is showing them their new world. And this was sort of this intuitive moment, and she didn't know what she was doing at the time, but she just started being like, she was like, okay guys, as we walk around, there's like cracked cement, there's prostitution, there's all sorts of terrible things happening around them. And she asked them to look for 3 things. She was like, I want you to look for something today that is totally new. I want you to look for something today that you think is beautiful. And I want you to find something that is interesting, and you wonder how it works. And we walked around the neighborhood. We got to the corner. It was like the first week of August. It was so hot. My kids couldn't walk around Target without crying, like, put me in the straw, put me in the garden, okay? We got to the corner, they were crying already, and we were both like, what have we done? You know, like, our life is gonna be about walking everywhere. And we got to the corner, and we were like, what is going on? But we just kept walking, and my wife just kept asking him these questions. And what she was doing was she wasn't trying to edit the dangers out of their life, but she was trying to help frame up their world. To see, like, the good things and the beautiful things, to look at their world with curiosity. And so, as parents, I think I wrote this on here, yeah. You're going to be tempted to edit all of the negative things out of your kids' life. But one of the primary roles as a parent, I think, is actually to help frame up all the things they experience. So I just got you a little frame here. This is a little visual aid reminder. You can't control everything they will see and experience in life, but you can help them frame it so that they can process it and to know how to interpret it. And as you do it, they'll actually help them develop a biblical worldview for how they see it and know how to process it and experience it. So Lisa goes, you know what was funny is she's like, that whole year I felt like I was failing. You know, we got to the corner and they were crying. We got around the corner and there was this guy laying, like there was a billboard on top of a taxi cab with a man laying on top of it for like a male strip club, a guy in like a G-string, you know, and then Marguerite's like, my daughter in that picture was like, Mom, that is so inappropriate. You know, and we were like, yes. And we tried to talk about my wife, Nana, she should be giving this talk. Another brilliant moment, she goes, yeah, Marguerite, but do you know why? Yeah, do you remember why we came to New York? And she was like, well, to tell people about Jesus. And Alicia says, that's what Marguerite says, tell people about Jesus. And my wife says, yeah, and you know, there's a lot of people in New York who don't know about Jesus. And sometimes when you don't know Jesus, you do some inappropriate things. So we're probably going to see a lot of inappropriate things, huh? And my daughter just goes, oh, yeah. And then it was okay to see like the men in the G-string, you know? But again, we can't edit, but we can frame. And so again, not tour guides, but expedition leaders. And so today, that's sort of what I want to try to like help us process. Not like we're talking about it in the context of diversity, but this is all about difference. As your kids experience difference in their life, they will experience that when it comes to cultural difference, particularly in their life. And so when the night before we moved, well, not the night, but right before we moved to New York, we, all of our friends from church, and our kids' friends, all of our best friends, our community group, we all got together at a little place just around the corner here for a saying goodbye party. This is us. We got together, it was really fun and sad. It was a saying goodbye party in 2015. Like our children were all small. I don't know, maybe some of you are in here, I don't know. And then 4 months later, this is my son Will with his like a pre-K class or kindergarten class, and these are the kids who became his best friends. Because of where we lived in New York and private school and stuff, this was the New York City public school system. And that's Will, so one of the two blonde kids. There were 9 different home languages that were spoken in his kindergarten class. Mohammed here was one of his best friends he played soccer with. Mohammed's Moroccan. Jordan is Puerto Rican. This guy's Latino. Up here, he's the guy in the orange shirt. He's Brazilian. He's one of his best buddies. This girl in the yellow dress is Lois. We thought Will had a crush on Lois. We kind of wanted him to have a crush on Lois. This little girl is Malaysian. She lived in our building. So really, like kids from literally their families were from all over the world, living together, and they were just all friends. And that was a very different experience for our kids. Like, I went back and I looked at this picture, and I was like, oh my gosh.
It's a snowstorm.
Yeah, there's literally every face is white. You know? And then, and I think what ended up being really fun and beautiful was this was just sort of the life we all lived together. And it wasn't, and like Lois, her dad was actually, her grandfather was a pastor. They were kind of a cool Christian family. And So we were like, I hope you like Lois. We're not gonna but we ended up being in the public school in this world. God really did really cool things in our life and in the lives of this community just by being present and being who we were in that community. So, and it was a beautiful thing, but there was a lot of questions in our school about there was a transitional housing, which is a shelter, a family shelter in our neighborhood too. So it was a really weird school. It was beautiful. There were like Google execs whose kids went to our school, and a fourth of the kids also were in the homeless shelter. So there was just a lot of like economic diversity too. And so, and all of those kids, like and their parents, would ride the train together, would play together, and they'd come over to our little apartment. And some of those kids, like their dads and their moms had like huge apartments, and some kids would walk into our little tiny apartment and think we were the rich family. And it was like living with that, and then trying to process that with our kids, you know, like as they saw all like the different worlds that all their friends came from, was something for us to try to navigate. So today in this, I want to talk about how do we biblically frame up all that kind of difference for our kids. So there's some really important ways I think we can do it. We don't live in New York City, right? Like one of the awesome things was like we were just forced into that kind of world, right? Like it was when we stepped out of our doorway in our apartment building into the school system, like it was just everywhere. Like that was sort of a challenge for us, but it was also kind of like it made it easy. I think in Dane County we have the challenge of like kind of like I call it wide open spaces. We have the challenge of choice, and so a lot of times we don't have to like we can just sort of be like choose the spaces that feel more natural and comfortable for us, and oftentimes that means just like people choose like to be in places that feel easy rather than places that might feel uncomfortable or risky. And so so like we can edit some of those uncomfortable spaces out of our lives. And so like I want to talk about how maybe we can do some of this here in Dane County, because coming back to Dane County, my family's had to be a lot more intentional about how do we try to live this out, and then how do we frame it up for us here. And hopefully I can give you some ideas of how you can do it, how if you guys could try to live some of this out now here in ways that maybe we didn't when our life looked more like this in Dane County and compared to what it kind of maybe looks like now. So I have not been paying attention at the time. Shannon?
You're good.
Yeah, I'm good, okay. All right, so I do have a bunch of Sharpies, and you can write some stuff. I'm going to give you 4 kind of words to write around your little frame. So you can keep this as a token for yourself. If your kiddo is a little bit older, there are some colorful strings. You can tie this to a string, and you could have a little exercise sometime. You could walk around town, and you could just do a little thing with them if you want to. This also opens up, and you could like set it on something in your house so you can see it if you want to.
Put it on the rear view mirror of your car.
Put it on, hang it right there. Yeah. So anyway, so we're just going to talk. I'm going to give you sort of a framework, pun intended, a biblical framework for how you can think about seeing cultural differences in your world through a biblical framework. I know I'm talking about this for your kids, but this is for us, because you're the expedition leader, and your kids take all their cues from you. And so this isn't easy for us for several reasons, which I'll talk about later, kind of like some innate, deeply human psychological reasons. And we'll process that just a little bit, and then you guys will discuss some stuff. So here's the first one. So at the bottom, I want you to write the image, if you want to. And so this is where people in churches like to start talking in Latin, but we'll keep it in English for now. So the Imago Dei is what people talk about. So this is the image of God. the image of God. So this comes from Genesis 1 and 2. I stitched together a few passages that talk about the creation of humanity from Genesis 1 and 2, and it says, God said, let us make humanity in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over all the earth. And then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. So in Genesis, it says humans have a unique sort of place in creation and in God, a unique place in God's heart. He created them to be in his image. That has some to do with like dignity on the earth. It also has to do with the idea of image is like has to do with God's like a symbolic representation of God's like kingship on the earth, and both men and women together. There is dignity and honor in all people. God like speaks everything else into creation, right? Sun, moon, stars, animals. But humans are intimately made. Like they're like an artist takes clay and like forms it, you know, like I don't know if you've ever with your kids or in your own life you like plastic clay, you can see your fingerprints in it. Like God creates us like that. And then breathes life into us. You know, and sometimes I'm like, just like you probably can't forget your first kiss. You know, like there's this intimate, it's like our creation is really intimate. So every human, there's something, like the way we are created speaks to something deeply, intimately, like dignified, special, wonderful about every human who lives. No matter like how messed up, how much you don't like them, no matter how like you don't like their politics, how much they have hurt you or the planet or your kids, there is something deeply like dignified and beautiful, even about the worst of us, right? So when you look at any human, like the first thing to remember is, God had to remember, okay, that person bears the image of God somehow, even if you don't want to see it. You know, like it's there. One of the things we tried with our kids is not to say like, oh, that is a bad man, but we would say like, oh, seems like kind of a tricky person. Like, that was a crazy confused. Instead of like saying somebody was bad, we would be like, oh, you know what, be careful about tricky people, right? So it was just an easy way to reframe some like kinds of people or specific people being like, oh, damn, you know, like, oh, that guy kind of seems like, or a tricky friend. You know, like, it was a simple way to like not tarnish the image of God in somebody. And distinguish between that. So, anyways, we talked about that was one thing we would do. So, and then if you want, here's another piece. On up the left side, you can write curiosity. So another piece of a biblical framework for how you want to see the world comes from a passage in 1 Thessalonians 5:21 and 22. And it says, Paul says, test everything, hold fast to what is good, and abstain from every form of evil. So hold fast to what is good. Okay, so God creates the world in Genesis 1 and 2, and everything he says, it's good, it's good, it's good. And then he asks the humans to like create culture, like and to make the earth flourish. Like he created them good, then he asked them to make it flourish. Theologically, we'd say that there's a principle of common grace. That in every human culture, there is something good. And so that means, like, we should approach it with curiosity to say, okay, what is good here? What's beautiful? What, even if it's a totally, like, a worldview that you're like, oh my gosh, that is so unbiblical. Somewhere in there is some good, something innate that, like, reflects the heart of God or some creational good. And we should be looking for it, right? Even like if you look at some of the worst, like in history, some of the worst civilizations, like in there's some longing. There's something in there that would reflect something that reflects the heart of God, right? There's some creational good. And so we got to be very intentional about finding the good in it. So that is sort of like common grace and being curious to look for the good. Here's a couple of curiosity questions that you can ask for yourself and help your kiddo do. This is sort of what Alicia was trying to do with our kids in New York. The question is, you could be like, oh, what's something new? Right, new experience. Like maybe your kid gets to hang out with someone else from a different culture, and they spent the afternoon with somebody, and you could be like, oh, what was something new you experienced today? What was maybe your kid doesn't like to think about beautiful things, but you could be like, oh, what was something cool, you experienced? Or was something beautiful you noticed? What's something interesting you wonder about? There's going to be things that they've never seen, and they're just going to wonder about it. And then just the question, how'd you feel about it? How'd you feel about it? It's been fascinating. We've been having some interesting conversations at Blackhawk. We offer a Mandarin speaking service. And there's been some families from some just solid Midwest white families who have gone in there just because you're curious, because they're like, oh, I wonder what they do. And then the kids are like, I like that. Can we go back, Mom and Dad? And the parents are like, oh, we have no idea what just happened. And the parents are like, how did you feel about it? They're like, we loved it. I loved singing the songs in that other culture. And the parents are like, oh, they expected the kids to be like, I didn't really like that. Can we go back to the way we always do it? And it's been actually really cool to see the way the kids have really actually loved exploring a new culture. It's the parents who have had the hardest time adjusting to something new. So our kids are often way more flexible than us. Here's another one. Especially, we do get more set in our ways the older we get. And often we think different is bad. Again, so just a thought to say, someone would be like, oh, I don't like that, it's bad. Just say, well, it was different. Different doesn't always mean bad. So even for our own hearts, remember, different doesn't mean bad. So this is a phrase that can be helpful. So there's some curiosity questions. All right, up the other side, I thought about keeping this one to say curious, but a different kind of curious. But I thought, we can call it caution. Paul says, test everything, hold fast what's good, but also abstain from what's evil. There's another theological idea. There's common grace, but there's also the reality of the fall. The world is broken. So that means the fall affects every person and every culture. So that means everything you experience, there's also going to be something broken about it. There's going to be beauty in it, but there's also going to be a mostly naked man in a G-string, right? You're going to see something that your kids are going to be like, Mom, that is so inappropriate, right? Or something that they're going to feel uncomfortable with that you're going to have to find a way to explain. Here's a caution. If you guys went to New York City, or you took your family on a mission trip to another part of the world, you'd be prepared to have a conversation about, maybe hearing the call to worship, or seeing a Buddhist temple. And you would be thinking about how to be proactive to that. In America, you're going to be thinking about how to edit those things out of your life, rather than thinking about how to have a conversation to process it. And I think you want to be thinking more about how to have those conversations here, and how to just keep your kids safe from seeing and experiencing those things. So we're super comfortable with the world around us, and we're actually sometimes more reactionary to it, keep it away from my kids, keep it away from my family. Then if we're like, hey, we're gonna go have a fun adventure somewhere overseas, or in a cool new place. But I think we should actually be thinking about the world around us as, hey, we're having a cool adventure somewhere in Madison. And we're gonna see some things that are fun and beautiful, and some things that are gonna be like, are gonna cause us that we're gonna have to think about. So, when I wrote this one for you guys, there are, psychologically, there are some things that make this one, being cautious, something we have to be careful about. I think you want to be thinking about the finding the common good primarily in cultures outside of your own. And I think you want to be cautious mostly about your own, the culture you come from. So for a couple of reasons. This one I have some notes on. So there's a thing called cognitive fatigue. So our brains work really hard all day to find similarities and differences, and then it gets really tiring. And so when we just try to group things into categories of difference and similarity, and then we move towards things that are similar because it's just easy, and we don't even think about it. And we move away from things that are different because it's just tiring, right? And then we sort things based on difference and similarity, and generally speaking, we see things that are similar as good, things that are different as bad, right? Different doesn't always mean bad, different doesn't always mean bad. And so without even thinking about it, we can approach culture that way, and people who look similar, different personalities, all of that in that same way. And so, so that is happening. So very naturally, we're going to naturally kind of self-sort, even if we have all the intentions not to do it. Another thing that happens is that when we self-sort, there's just lots of research on it. We also have a thing called negativity bias. We will focus on the negative, we will remember the negative, we will rehearse it way more than any of the positive. Think about the last time you went on a trip with your kids. What are the things you remember?
A cockroach.
What? A cockroach.
Terrible
A blown
food.
up diaper.
Terrible food.
Terrible food.
Great fevers.
What'd you say?
Fever.
Fevers. You remember all the bad things, right? Like that's what you remember. It's like psychologists, it's like 10, it takes like 10 good things to help you outweigh remembering one bad. So the same thing happens when it comes to culture or any kind of difference or any kind of negativity. So this is why, like walking around New York City, my wife is like, point out the good, point out the good, point out the good, point out the good. Because if not, they're gonna encounter any kind of new experience and they're only gonna remember the negative things. And the same thing is gonna be true with you. So you're gonna walk into an experience with another family, some other culture, another way, and you're gonna be like, in the moment you're gonna be like, oh, that was kind of fun, but one negative thing happens and you're gonna be like, oh, that was not a good experience. And that's what you're gonna remember. So when you're in there, that's what's gonna happen. So this is what I wanna tell you, is it takes a lot more courage, self-awareness, and the help of other people to think about the negative in your own world and the culture that you come from. Because usually, what's like me is good, and what's not like me is bad. But if the fall is real, then there are things in the culture that I come from that I have to let go of. This verse from Paul, hold fast, and actually in Greek it means like stay close, and abstain is like don't go near there. Yeah, this is like a parental command, right? This is like no, hang on to mom's hand. You know, like, don't touch that. This is what Paul is saying. There's something in the world you come from that the Bible would say, don't go near there. And you're gonna be like, but I've always had this, you know? And it's really hard to be cautious with those things. But there are other things in the world you come from, and Paul's like, well, that is so good. Hang on to that. And then finally, here's some questions. Like, ask your kids how do you feel about that? Anything make you feel uncomfortable? What do you think about this? And then the question, how do you think God feels about that? That'd be a question. And then I gotta go faster. I'm sorry. Your children need naps. So. If you write those questions down, let me say this. Moving back to Madison, this has been hard. One of the things my kids noticed right when they went back to school, they were like, I was like, how'd it go first day? And they're like, Dad, it was weird. Like all the white kids sit together at a table, all the black kids sit together at a table, the Latino kids, like people don't sit together. They'd actually never experienced that in a school. They were used to all the kids sitting all together, regardless of their background, rich or poor, whatever. And they're like, Madison's weird. Our kids started doing youth sports. It was fun. We'd go to basketball tournaments and things, and we'd go in, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's weird. All the white parents sit together from the same team, and the non-white parents sit together. We're rooting for the same kids, but they don't sit together. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna try to sit next to the non-white parents. And I sat down and they'd look at me like, what are you doing? You know? But we became friends. And we just kind of mixed it up. We actually, my son joined a rec league team, which is the free league. And he's the only white kid on the team. Sometimes he's the only white kid on both teams. Like, economics play a big role in this. And so, and it's been really good for him to be in that world. We have to frame it up, because sometimes there's a lot more swearing. Sometimes fights almost happen. There's a lot more swearing from the stands. It's really fun, actually, to go to these games. It's really rowdy. But sometimes in the fear of like, what will my kids be exposed to, we're also editing out some really beautiful moments too. Because there's some awesome kids on those teams whose families also really love Jesus. And there's the opportunity to be present for some really cool redemptive things. But sometimes as we make choices, we don't realize we're actually editing out some really beautiful moments in our kids' lives. So, which goes to this last point, and then I'm gonna have to wrap it up because Shannon's gonna punch me. Which up at the top, you gotta remember mission. So we talk about the Imago Dei in Latin, the image of God. This is like, if you want to talk Latin, you can say the Missio Dei. This is the mission of God. God's doing a thing. Like, he loves all people. All people have dignity, and he loves all people. Like, no matter where you're from, no matter what you look like, no matter how messed up your life is, like Revelation 7 says, in the end, like, God will gather a great multitude of people that no one can number from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb of God. They'll cry out in a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. There will be discernible difference in heaven. Like, we'll get there and we'll be able to see, like, like where people come from. We'll hear the languages they speak. Like, we'll be able to notice the difference. That's kind of a cool thing to think about. That means, like, one of the things we can do, like now that we'll get to do in heaven, is like be part of a community where there's discernible difference with people who love Jesus. Like, that's actually like practicing for heaven. And so I think for you guys to think about, like, how heavenly is the home you're creating? Not just in like, how warm and friendly and kind is it? How generous is it? But like, how much does it look like this? And that will mean you'll have to get uncomfortable, right? If all of those like psychological things are real in our human nature, it means we'll have to, all of it, no matter what culture you come from, you're gonna have to get uncomfortable. And explore, especially in Dane County. Because we have wide open spaces, we have plenty of choice, and we'll have to kind of shuck the trends that like are for a community that loves to rally and champion, like, love everybody, diversity, you know, like all that sort of stuff. When the rubber meets the road, we tend to go in places where it's just easier. And this is actually one of the really cool ways that for people who have deep motivation because of the image of God, because we believe there's good in everything and brokenness even in ourselves, and because we follow a God who is on mission, like, we have some of the deepest motivation and resources to actually live this out, right? Like, so as parents who are raising kids with this, like, you guys, like, you can do cool things in your life and in your kids' life, and you're a community in really powerful ways. So here's a couple tips I can give you. Here's how heavily is your home? That's a good question for you to think about. You could do some learning, but when you're overwhelmed moms, you don't have any time to read. I mean, I told my wife I was going to throw up some books, and she was like, "They don't have time to read." Maybe an audiobook.
Yeah, we'll snag him and put him in.
We'll snag him and put him in.
You know.
Here's what I got though. Here's, you could do some exploring. Explore some food with your kids. To some places where you will feel out of place. Here are some bakeries, some like ethnic food places, like markets, where you will go and buy food, or where you will not feel like you're necessarily in Madison anymore. And then you can ask curiosity questions with your kids when you go. And I can have you guys, I can send these out. This is Will when he was 6 eating sushi. So, and loving it. So you can snag that, explore some food. The Hmong Legacy Market on Fish Hatchery Road, has anybody ever been there? You go in the back, you can get this purple sticky rice. Your kids will love it. It's like squished together, you eat it. It's purple rice. They'll think like, what? That's amazing. It's weird. Let's eat it. So, you can explore worship. This is us. We took our kids to a Nigerian church service. It was so fun and loud. The women danced. The lady looks really stern. She wasn't. She was just a bad moment. I snuck that picture. Church lasted 4 hours. There was no child care. Good Lord, it was exciting. Have an iPad or a book or a place for your kid to take a nap. But there's some great. Lighthouse Church has a bilingual service, Mount Zion. We try every year to visit one church that is outside of context, just to remind our kids that like our family is way bigger. People worship in all sorts of different ways than we do. So like in Madison, you can have that kind of experience. And then ask the curiosity questions. Explore worship. We're going to worship in heaven with lots of different ways to worship. It's a fun way you can do that with your kids. I'm a pastor. You can skip church for a week. It's okay. You can practice for heaven with the worship playlist. You can scan this. This is a little multicultural, multilingual playlist. I like some of these songs. I gave it to our tech guy to play sometimes at church before and after service. You can scan this. This is a Spotify playlist if you want. You can play it around your kids. Some of the songs you'll know, some of them you won't. In a whole bunch of different languages. I call this is like worship practice for heaven. So just reminds you that you're part of a bigger family and a bigger community. And then I got, anybody want to, let's just scan it, maybe a couple extra seconds before I get into too much trouble.
We'll probably try to share your slides in some form or fashion, so 'cause there's a wealth of.
Yeah. And then I got Explore Friendships.
Oh.
This is Malik. Malik's from Yemen. Her dad, they're immigrants. Her dad ran a hot dog food truck. And that's Marguerite. She was wonderful and beautiful. We asked her family if we could give her a Jesus Storybook Bible. She hung out at our house a lot. And be intentional with the kind of kids and play dates you set up. You just never know the kinds of like beautiful relationships that will happen and the way that God might open up real relationships. We actually got to talk about Jesus a lot with Malik. Her parents were okay with it. They were a little cautious with us. But they knew we loved her, and they worked long, crazy hours trying to make it in America. And she was just a super kind, beautiful human. And they were like great friends. And who like fled a really horrible situation. And we felt like we got to be a part of like a beautiful, redemptive part of her story. And I just think you just never know how like that friendship might bless your kid, your own life, and the friendship and the family of the kid that you're a part of. So, and you just gotta pray. All of this is unnatural, and you're gonna need supernatural help to do it as you try to frame up the world and try to avoid the pitfall of editing and being a tour guide and being an expedition leader, as you try to instill the ability to have a framework to process the world rather than protect our kids from the world. So that's what I got.